Hello.
Good evening, Graham. Back from, I think, the Lake District. Is that right?
Yeah. But anyway, let's move on quickly because it
Oh,
is the season when Halloween and Christmas comes along, which you know is terrible for the arts because it all turns into panto season and family films and the arts just turns into like best ofs and looking back the year before. So it's almost like the year's finished already, and we're not
I'm
even
not aware of that,
quite.
Graham. It's not even November yet. I'm not accepting that.
Exactly, yeah. But that's how it sort of feels.
No, not going with that at all yet.
All right, okay. Happy to argue, happy.
That said, I did get you right on pantomime on one level. I did get the Harrogate Theatre saying, "Are you coming to the press night in late November?" Obviously, so you're right. Even before, I have noticed Christmas adverts have been starting on radio stations, to my irritation as usual. But there's plenty going on before that. It goes into that season of what you're saying. November is not a write off. It's not a no November. No.
Yeah, well, I suppose you got a point because that film we saw at the Edinburgh National Film Festival, which was made by the Scottish National Theatre, The Strange
Yes.
Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where we're sitting at the premiere in the row behind the great Scottish actor and quite scary Scottish actor David Heyman.
Yes.
Well, we noticed the Sky logo, etc., on the
Mm.
credits for what is a really low budget black and white film,
Mm.
and I thought, why on earth have they got Sky involved with something with such a tiny budget? But lo and
Mm.
behold, it's actually being broadcast tonight. The film we saw on Sky
Yeah.
Arts at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, there you are, you see.
Mm.
Which is probably the only time it will get screened, but never mind. Now, Graham, well, I'm sorry to have mentioned Lake District. Hope you had a good time there. Celebrations 60th, 60th birthday. Jolly occasion, I'm sure. Um, However, talking of people who are even older than you, me, and Sarah, Rolling Stones, they're on the front of MOJO magazine. The past, present, and here's the interesting one, future of the Rolling Stones. This can't be the last record. Graham, you've suggested that MOJO magazine may be celebrating its 30th anniversary, but it feels more like 80. And I guess if one looks at who's on the cover, Peter Gabriel, Sly Stone, Joni Mitchell, Thurston Moore, moderately young by comparison, Carly Simon, Graham Parker, who had the pleasure of being interviewed by you the other day, Joe Walsh, and Bob Dylan's Secret Treasures. I can't believe there's a single secret treasure left with Bob Dylan, but anyway, so that's your
Uh,
point. Not one young up and coming artist.
yeah, but it's worse than that. They recently had their 30th anniversary issue. So Mojo's, which I get almost every month, so I have to put
Mm,
my hands up to that. It's been
same
going for
here.
30 years. The front cover had sort of like pseudo Greco-Roman busts in sort of like silvery white of six major figures from rock history in the last 30 years. And they were Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, Paul Weller, and then two women, Dolly Parton and Kate Bush. Nobody from the worlds of rap or reggae or soul. And then inside it had the best emoji with one artist every year for the last 30 years. And again, it was like Paul Weather, Oasis, The
Yeah.
Beatles, Blur, Beck, Flaming Lips, White Stripes, Bob Dylan, Wilco, Richard Hawley, Brian Wilson. And then you got Kate Bush. Wow. Then eventually, I think they had Lana Del Rey and they had Kendrick Lamar just to sort of, and Taylor Swift, just to sort of show that they weren't completely trapped in the old white man's rock routine. But the
Mm,
whole thing was like really sort of like it's all part. I mean, you and me love all the classic 60s and 70s rock and pop, but the whole approach of critics who write these things now that we still buy, it's all like all that really matters is 60s and 70s classic rock and pop, and everything else is in its shadow and in its shade. And although that's sometimes true, it's definitely not true the whole time. And
no.
I remember like Enemy when Enemy was still big in the early 90s. It had a real hard job tackling rap when rap became so big, and it seemed
Mm,
to boil down to it could handle Public Enemy because they thought it was a bit like the Sex Pistols. It could handle De La Soul because that was a bit sort of like hippie 60s stuff. But in general, it could never really get its head around rap or any music that wasn't entirely white. And as much as I like Mojo magazine, it's brilliantly written and put together. It's trapped in that bubble.
I mean, even hip hop and rap. I mean, I seem to recall on the front of Culture magazine in the Times, Sunday Times earlier this year, um, marking a major anniversary for hip hop. And I can't recall the same kind of thing happening in Mojo or Uncut in the same way. Now, whether that's because their research shows that there's only certain people that read the magazine and therefore they just play true to that. But on the other hand, if you don't spread out, the more narrow you become, actually, the more self-defeating it becomes, doesn't it?
It's sort of circular. Enemy had the same thing in the 90s when it used to be queried in its letters pages, when the letters pages were pretty good in Enemy, about why there was so few rap acts and black music in general. It always said, well, yeah, whenever we put a rap act in the front cover, it sells fewer copies than the week before. Yeah, but if you don't stick to your guns, you're never going to create a new audience. If you always pander to the same people and the same thoughts, you never get anything new. So you're entirely right. It's a circular argument.
On the front of Uncut magazine is an up-and-coming, really young up-and-coming black musician.
Oh yeah, that'd be Sly Stone.
Sly Stone, yeah.
Yeah, well, Sly Stone's great, and we met a guy, or was it me?
He made that documentary.
Yeah, he made the documentary, which I don't believe has ever been released. But we saw it there at National Film Festival about 5 years ago, which was a great film about tracking down Sly Stone, who at that point hadn't gone straight in terms of drinking drugs, and supposedly now he has actually, got clean. But it was a great film. It didn't get shown, and it was really about events from 50 years ago. So Uncut's finally caught up with Sly Stone.
I mean, invariably it's normally Jimi Hendrix that's on the front page, on the cover. It's usually that every few months. Let's have Jimmy back on the cover if it's not Bob Dylan. So what can you do about this? I mean, these are magazines that feel like they're of the past anyway. You and I are talking as men in our 60s, behemoths of that time. I mean, has culture, from the point of view of writing about culture now, is that more to be found online? That kind of in-depth writing, or even appreciation of musical forms that are.
Yeah, if you go to Quietus and other music websites online, they take the modern music world really seriously, but they have much less impact than the old printed music media, music journalism used to have. And also they're a bit, because they don't have that impact, because they're not truly engaged with the wider community in the mainstream in a way that the Enemy in Sounds and Melody Maker were, the writing's different. They haven't, when people used to write for the Enemy, they knew that what they wrote could have a big effect on the wider public, on the acts themselves, and on the record companies' behavior as well. They had a lot of influence, which affected the writing, which was usually quite sharp and critical and
more
quite
in depth, of course, Graham, wasn't it? That version of Enemy was very in depth,
a bit self-important. Whereas I think well-written websites like Quietus don't have that role, and it affects how they think and how they judge.
So where does a Mojo magazine go then in its future?
Well,
because we are all going to die out. We are all going to die out. It's going to die out.
Yeah, the whole thing's going to die out. Eventually all the fans of bands from the 60s and 70s will die, and the bands themselves are already all starting to go, and Mojo and Uncut will go the same way. They will disappear because they haven't created a new generation of readers or a new generation of bands they love. I mean, Flaming Lips, have they ever been given a front cover in Mojo? I don't think so. Might have had it once in Uncut. And it's like in Blur occasionally get front covers, but if you can't lionize the things that are relevant and good and popular in the current era, you're not going to create a new audience or any longevity. But they're under pressure to sell copies, and the easiest thing to do always is to pander to people like you and me. I'd prefer it if they actually put more modern acts on the front cover. It would have been quite funny, for example, if Mojo had given Wet Leg the front cover and done a big interview with the girls from the band as well as most of the guys.
Wouldn't that have been worth the risk? Well, that would have been worth the risk.
Yeah, but they've never done that sort of thing. They never will. When Flaming Lips were both relevant and popular in the late 90s, early noughties, they didn't give them the front cover. They didn't give them like a 4-page interview. There was none of that. They were treated like sort of like up and coming young act that deserved a little bit of coverage before you went back to talk about the Beatles and the Stones and maybe Paul Weller.
I was struck about aging when Jeff Hurst came onto the field yesterday in honor of Bobby Charlton, and I think if we're right in thinking, Jeff Hurst is now the last player from that team still alive.
I think you're right. Yeah. Being a Scotsman, I'm not an expert in the England 66 World Cup.
Sorry, Graham. 1967
but
World Cup final, of course, at Wembley, 3-2 to the Scots. Yes,
yeah,
sorry, forgot that.
Yeah, but that's just one win in a match that didn't really matter that much. But yeah, it was a glorious.
But it just suddenly struck me. There's another sign of, down to the last player from that team.
Yeah, well, let's get off this nostalgic thing. And we're talking about the Stones, and the thing about the Stones is that the punk rock movement. I mean, the Stones got influenced by punk. I mean, Some Girls is a bit punky, and their new album, Hackney Diamonds, has also got about 3-4 tracks that are a bit punky. And the Stones were influenced by punk enough so that Mick Jagger actually, when they toured America in '78 and the Some Girls tour, wore a Destroy Anarchy T-shirt designed by Jamie Reid. That's how much the Stones were influenced by punk. But there's always a theory that punk was against the Stones and the Beatles and the Who and all the '60s stuff, and that punk was all about being influenced by the Stooges and MC5 and Jonathan Richman and Velvet Underground and maybe a bit of krautrock. But I don't think that's true, because even though the Clash sang No Elvis, Beatles or Rolling Stones on 1977, the B-side of White Riot, the Clash then later toured America as the support act to the Who, and there's at least two punk singles in '77, '78 that have Rolling Stones tracks as their B-sides. And on top of that, many acts ripped off. The Pistols ripped off Slade. Goodbye to Jane's by Slade is exactly the same rip as Pretty Vacant. There's a few other tracks that ripped things off. Like, if you listen to the Pistols, there's an end of one of their songs that's got the same sort of feedback as the end of John I'm Only Dancing by David Bowie. So the idea that punk was just all these outsider bands influenced by other outsider bands is just absolute hooey.
Well, ultimately, I think as the years have gone by, you see much more strongly now the connection in the songwriting between early Who, and I'm not talking about, it would be easy just to say the mod influence, but actually punk rock clearly had strong influences from early Kinks tracks, early Who tracks. That's absolutely the case.
Also, I think the punks over exaggerated how much they were rejecting the past. So, for example, the CBGB scene in New York, which was the first experience really of punk, with bands like Television and Richard Hell and Patti Smith, and then the Ramones, in Blondie, then Talking Heads. Well, there's a couple of examples where the links to the Stones are quite clear cut. So the first time that Patti Smith and guitarist Lenny Kaye actually saw Television live was at CBGB's in 1974, and they went to see Television play live, having attended the New York premiere of the Rolling Stones concert film Ladies and Gentlemen, because they were huge Rolling Stones fans. Johnny Thunders, who was in like early versions of bands in the CBGB scene after he left the New York Dolls, and New York Dolls were very heavily Stones influenced anyway. Well, Johnny Thunders was such a Stones fan that in the film Gimme Shelter, which is mainly about the Stones' disastrous big live concert at Altamont in late '69, but starts off with when the Hells Angels stabbed to death a black fan who was running towards the Stones on stage, supposedly with a gun in his hand. Well, the early part of that whole tour was a triumph for the Rolling Stones in '69, and they played at Madison Square Gardens, which was also filmed. But in the film Gimme Shelter, there's a bit where Mick Jagger asked for the house lights to be turned on at the venue so you can see the crowd. And when it does that, when the lights come up, in the film you can see the young Johnny Thunders on someone's shoulders at the front of the crowd. So Johnny Thunders, the ultimate rebel who rejected everything, he was a big Stones fan as well. So there is a lineage between the Stones and punk. It's much bigger than people think.
Yeah, I mean, because I think what was sort of seen as being the music that was being rejected at the time was probably things like Alan Parsons Project, and Pink Floyd, maybe Genesis, any number of the bands that were more, yes, definitely yes. Barclay James Harvest. So that, well, it turns out that Johnny Rotten, I think, was a huge
Brother
fan of
Demand.
Pink Floyd, for example, wasn't he? You know, so
A
the
little bit.
nihilism, it was all about, I suppose, any song that was over 3 minutes was against what became the punk principle. And so hence the rejection of music that would have been more Bob Harris's music at the time, whereas John Peel would be playing well, he was the first to go on to playing the punk tracks, of course, wasn't he? So the nihilism wasn't rooted, as it turns out, with John Lydon. He's gone on to Lydon's gone on to say that actually, you know, his love of music why he was negative is that he was playing that role by being negative about it, but actually he appreciates the musicianship that went in that era. So it's not that he's come back to it, it's actually what he liked at the time, but he wasn't allowed to say that he liked it because it was against what was being preached by Malcolm McLaren.
Well, yeah, the music press wanted something new. The young acts wanted to be successful, put the two things together, and they're going to exaggerate what they really think.
Show.
Yeah, which they did. But if you've watched the Bill Grundy show, it's not an act. They were just fed up with crap. And the Bill Grundy show was the usual middle of the road, absolute crap, where you knew nothing about the people he was talking to and wasn't really interested anyway. So being a bunch of like retrobates and natural rebels at that point, they just let him have it.
Which female singer was amongst those in together?
Susie Sue, for going down memory lane.
Yeah,
of the Banshees fame. But this whole conversation taps into BBC 6 Music, which obviously is a current radio station, but is linked to that whole lineage of John Peel, punk, Uncut, and MOJO. And recently the figures came out for the listening figures, the official industry's figures for all the main radio stations in Britain. In the last 3 months, BBC 6 Music, which was launched in 2002, and although John Peel didn't die till 2004, you can't imagine BBC 6 Music having been launched without John Peel's influence. In the last 3 months, they've had an 11.7% rise on listening figures year on year. And it's the biggest digital radio station because, of course, BBC 6 Music doesn't exist except digitally. And so of all the stations that are on digital, it's the biggest digital station in Britain.
Now, why have the figures gone up?
Well, the interesting thing is that they've sort of like revamped their whole program.
They have.
They've downgraded Matt Riley and Gideon Cole, who are the most
a joint show.
The old Matt Riley and Gideon Cole are great, but they could have had a show about 1982 or 1970. So they haven't lost all their radio hours, but they've lost a lot of them. They've introduced a new evening show, which only plays new music called Music Fix with Tom Ravenscroft, who's obviously John Peel's son. And to keep things like connected, it can't go too radical. And Deb Grant, and they only play new music for at least an hour every night. And actor Cillian Murphy is back late nights, and he's brilliant. And Steve Lamacq sort of stepped down, although I believe he's returning. And Steve Lamacq again is like a real.
He's going to do one show a week, I think.
Yeah, he's a real old school 1990s Britpop era DJ. So he's like definitely in the past, although he's great. So that's supposedly helped the ratings, although, you know, it's only 3 months, you can't quite tell yet. But the interesting thing about its success is that overall, the number of listeners it has a week, BBC 6 Music, is only 2.75 million. So even though the figures initially suggest it's doing really well, it's only 2.75 million. BBC Radio 1 gets 7.7. The Greatest Hits Radio, its biggest commercial rival, gets 6.6 million a week. BBC Radio 2 is the biggest radio station in Britain. BBC Radio 2 gets 13.4 million listeners per week. So BBC 6 Music is strictly small fry in that context. And if you think how many hours they're broadcasting, how many famous musical names are DJs on it, from Iggy Pop to Guy Garvey, that's actually a smaller listening audience than I would have expected.
It's smaller than Talk Sport's latest figures, which are 3.2 million per week. And that's a significant growth as well.
That's interesting because BBC Radio 3, which is, of course, the classical music station with a little bit of jazz, it gets 2 million. And it made me think that BBC Six Music and all that pedigree rock and indie heritage that we love, which MOJO loves, Uncut loves, and BBC Six Music, despite playing a hell lot of new music, also it's in its DNA, makes me think that if it only gets 0.6 million viewer listeners more than BBC Radio 3, basically rock and indie is the new classical music. And in the future, it's no matter, when our generation goes and there's no more MOJO and no more Uncut, maybe even no more BBC Six Music, it's going to survive. Rock and indie is going to survive. 20th century, early 21st century, rock and indie is going to survive like classical music has survived. That's the lesson I get from the figures.
But it might be niche.
Oh yeah, it's going to be niche. It's going to be like people who, when I was younger, were into big band jazz from the 30s and 40s. They used to get their own show on Radio 2 till probably the 90s. Certainly in the early 80s, you could still get BBC. You could still get big band jazz on BBC Radio 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll become more niche.
I mean, if you look at the success of Greatest Hits Radio, it destroyed, and I think that's the only word for it, loads of local radio stations. But it's got massive commercial muscle, and it has done very well for itself. And it's got big name DJs, and obviously you can listen to it all over the country. And interestingly, the music, of course, very strongly pushes the past, not the present. It's nearly all based on the past. And that's another sign. It's again the similar thinking to some extent, less niche, obviously, than MOJO and Uncut, but it's still about past hits, because that's the thing that taps into, well, you've talked about how emotion is now the number one thing, Graham. Emotion and nostalgia, probably two things, actually, that when music, of course, plays to nostalgia, plays to remembering things, and that's a very powerful tool in the human body. It's the thing that lasts longest, our love of music.
Yeah, Greatest Hits Radio is what Radio 1 was, apart from John Peel, in the mid-80s, because until the 90s, you didn't get any John Peel-like DJs on daytime Radio 1. It was all very much Greatest Hits Radio. So they're serving an audience who are probably mainly in their 40s and 50s with a little bit of 30s. Whereas BBC Six Music, its heart's probably serving people of our age, maybe slightly younger, maybe slightly older. And what makes me worried about BBC Six Music as well is that Lauren Laverne, who's a great DJ, who's usually on at breakfast time in BBC Six Music, she gets 1.4 million listeners a week. Now, if the overall BBC Six Music total is only 2.75 million listeners, and she gets 1.4, that means the rest of the week airtime and the rest of the usually very good DJs, although there's a few annoying ones, they don't get that many listeners. And so BBC Music's playing lots of specialist world music, lots of specialist rap music, lots of specialist dance music, electronica, avant-garde. It's doing the work in a very admirable way, but none of that stuff can possibly be getting that many listeners. So again, it makes me worry about BBC Six Music's long-term future.
I mean, I go always back to this thought that it used to be that people would buy the 6 albums a year, and the people, most people would be buying the same 6 albums per year. There is a safety in mediocrity. Mediocrity? I don't know. Music by level 42, probably. I'm thinking that kind of love of that kind of music, and I always think why, which might be harsh because their concerts still sell out, but if you look at music that's more progressive, more out there, more groundbreaking, I don't think it's ever going to draw overall the same listening figures as the commercial middle ground, the definition of pop music as opposed to rock music.
But the interesting thing is the commercial middle ground. Yeah, but the commercial middle ground in the past would have been on Greatest Hits Radio. It's now just a world of streaming. There's no mainstream outlets for the world of streaming in terms of pop and modern R&B and the sort of stuff we don't like very much. It doesn't really need a radio station, although BBC Radio 1 still plays it quite a lot. It survives without one. So there's no linkage now between the more outsider stuff on BBC Six Music which would have been John Peel in the 80s and 90s on his own practically.
Yeah.
And the mainstream, there's no influence. There's no influence between B6 Music and the wider world. There's no linkages between the stuff that streams in its billions in the pop world and BBC6 Music or Great Hits Radio or Radio 2. Everything's in its own silos. Everything's been split up into niches, and some of the niches are huge niches and some are small niches, but they're all niche. There is no coming together of the various aspects of the listening audience and the music buying public. That's what's different between now and then.
Graham, what did you say the Radio 1 audience figures were now?
I think it's 7.7, I think.
So, I mean, it's not actually that people are just not listening to the radio at all. That's still a considerable number of a younger target audience that is still listening to radio. It's not, whereas they seemingly claim to have given up on conventional 3-channel television or 4-channel television or 5-channel television. It's not that they're just streaming. There is still a desire to listen to the radio that's there across different age groups. So I wouldn't want to give up completely on the future of something like 6Music.
Have you listened to Radio 1 recently?
I couldn't tell you a single song with any confidence that's in the top 40.
Well, just imagine like in the 80s when you didn't like listening to all the Radio 1 DJs you stand up on Top of the Pops presenting.
Yeah.
You know, that whole bunch, Paul Burnett, etc. Because they used to play mainly the most middle of the road pop. It was going, and they were all hits. If the top 30 had about 5 tracks that we'd like in 1984 or 1978, Radio 1 during the daytime wouldn't play any of them. They just just play the good stuff. So we really, it was a bit annoying listening to Radio 1 during the daytime. Listen to it now, it's even more annoying because they don't play anything that isn't modern sort of like pop, dance oriented or R&B. It's just like a sea of that sort of stuff. You could sell like 20 million albums of a hard rock band and Radio 1 wouldn't play it because it's got its target audience that it devotes itself exclusively to, and it won't let anything else in.
I mean, they've talked about the death of the guitar band for a long time, haven't they? And we've discussed this before, actually, I think, on the podcast, the death of the guitar band and whether it's been exaggerated or not. But the primary guitar bands are all ancient.
There's quality guitar bands now, but they all sell about 60,000 copies of an album or 100,000 copies of an album if they're lucky. I think Wet Legs sold pretty well, and they're a guitar band. I'd guess they've probably sold 200,000 copies easily. So it's not dead. It's just not as big as it was before.
It's slowly dying, man. Slowly dying.
This sort of ties with Hawley, because Richard Hawley, I think you're a bigger fan of Rich Hawley than I am. He's got his new greatest hits.
We're going to discuss him in next week's podcast, looking at his compilation album. Yes.
Now and then.
Yeah, now then, just now then. There's no and in it. Just now then.
Now then.
It's the Yorkshire. Is that Yorkshire expression? Now then. No then.
Just now then.
Just now then, I think. Yeah, I think so. So
I mean, so it's got. But he again, but then it's 3 words.
But he is yes, he's a guitarist, but he's played in different styles. But essentially, there's an element of nostalgia about of his guitar work. He could have been playing with in Roy Orbison's band in his time.
Well, exactly, yeah. He's like Chris Isaak without trying to be glamorous. Really, he's like a sort of like more natural 1950s, early 60s pop rock and roll, slightly croony type guy. Although he has done, an album tour that isn't the same as that. He has branched out a bit.
He had that album where he turned the guitar up to maybe 12, not even 11. So he did do one that did that, but it was very purposefully that. And I remember going to see him at Pocklington on that tour, and that was seriously loud that night. Seriously loud. But that's a detour, and it wasn't a pointless cul-de-sac. I really liked that album, but I when it comes to looking for new guitar heroes, when did guitar solos die out, Graham? I mean, can you remember a guitar solo in recent times? Do they still exist? Does anyone still have a guitar solo?
Punk sort of killed them because punk was dead against guitar solos.
Hmm.
Although there were some punk tracks which did have minor solos in them. And since then, there have been even cool or trendy bands who've had guitar solos. But in general, nobody of the critics of light that has sold lots of copies has had a guitar solo regularly. And the difference was that in the 60s and 70s, before punk that is, almost every guitar band would always have a solo in almost each song. And that's what changed after punk. It never
I suppose when
became.
Stone Roses made the Second Coming, John Squire decided that he would reinvent Jimi Hendrix, and he did play some guitar solos very pointedly on that album. But that was a rarity.
Yeah, Jay Mascis of Dinosaur Jr. He was
yes, that's
was
a good call.
Very on searing guitar solos. But yeah, those guys are a bit few and far between. Whereas before, in the glory days of the Enemy and Sounds of Melody Maker, when they used to have their annual awards voted on by the readers poll would have like its own category for best guitar player, because it was instrumentation was taken very seriously before punk. It was all about how good's that keyboard player? Oh, that drummer's very good. Wow, that was a great guitar solo. It was all about musicianship, and punk was like, no, we don't want all this.
We don't need that.
You've been to classical music school so you can play instrument properly. Rubbish. We want some rock and roll. We want something to the point. Something that isn't self-indulgent and showy-offy. Something that actually moves you. So that's what punk did to the lead guitar solo. But you're right, it's never fully died out.
Where does it leave the middle eight then, Graham? That maybe the middle eight's going to last longer than the guitar solo.
No, I think the middle eight's the middle eight's fairly dead as well. I mean, most modern pop all about like verse chorus, middle eight,
verse chorus.
They just find a groove and a riff and just pelt it to death,
hammer it to the floor.
Or in the case of pop, the massage it to death. The massage that groove in various, soft, differing tones of instrumentation to take it all the way to the end, so you know exactly where the song's going at all times. There's no change of direction at any point.
I've not heard Hackney Diamonds yet. Rolling Stones, are they doing any middle eights?
Yeah, there are. There's a couple of middle eights in the album. Yeah, there's some old school songwriting on the Stones in the album. There's definitely a few middle eights. Yeah, middle eights are important.
Well, Paul McCartney, he would surely be the #1 champion of middle eights, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but occasionally he has a big hit or a great song where he doesn't bother with that. He just goes for the groove, because even the 60s, the greatest era of middle eight songwriting, well, apart from that, the great crooners and songwriters of the 30s like Cole Porter. Well, even then in the 60s, there was still songs based on grooves and riffs that were great. And McCartney himself, like, if you think about Coming Up, there's no middle eight coming up.
No,
think about
I was exactly going to say that. Coming Up, no middle eight
songs. So there's never any. Yeah, there's no rule that's totally strict. All rules will there be broken if it makes the song great. Why hate songs that are just tedious because they've got the groove, they've got the riff, and then it's not particularly exciting groove. It's nice, but not exciting, and then it just carries on forever. It's like, oh, this is a bit tedious. If it's an exciting riff,
I heard
the
a song yesterday.
thing in the radio.
Johnny Walker yesterday played a Wings song that I'd completely forgotten was by Wings.
What's that?
Rock Show?
Oh yeah, from 75 on Biggest Amazon. Yeah.
So was it a single?
Interesting about that. It was a single. It was an edited version of the album track. The album track lasts about 7 minutes if you include the Venus and Mars intro at the beginning. Before it goes on a rock show. And the interesting about rock show is that it's got different sections in terms of the feel of the song. And there's one section where McCartney suddenly adopts a sort of yobbish London accent, and it goes all sort of punky just for about 20 seconds. It goes all punky, and this is 1975. It's almost like punk was already there, it just needed to be brought out by younger people like Johnny Rotten.
Like Johnny, because Sex Pistols, I think, formed in 75, didn't they? So that's right. Came through in 76, but formed in 75.
They probably heard Rock Show on the Wings album and thought, that's what we want to do.
I never realised, Graham, that link was there. Who knew that the whole influence of Rock Show, a song I'd completely. It's really weird when you come across a song. I'd totally forgotten that song. Totally
Yeah, it
forgotten.
sounds well. When you hear the bit in Rock Show where they go all yobbo and Londonish and punkish, it's like, what the hell's going on here?
Was Denny Lane doing some? Was it Denny Lane was on there? Is that right? Denny Lane?
Yeah, it was almost for McCartney let the other members of Wings have a few songs each and get to sing some vocals. So yeah,
He did sing some vocals on that track, didn't he?
Yeah, but still McCartney being yobbish. It's not.
Yeah, not Denny Lane being yobbish, right?
No, it's definitely McCartney. Yeah.
So this is probably one of our most looking back to the past editions ever of our podcast.
This is like two old men talking about
And
the Boer War. His family were involved with it because the great granddad was actually a colonel in the British Army. That's what it's like, except about music.
As we've gone on, I'm suddenly aware of this, thinking we sound really ancient tonight. This is.
Yeah, we're going to have to edit this down to only the references to modern music, so it'll be about a minute and a half long.
Right, I want some positive thoughts to end on tonight then. Something that's looking to the future. You have written off the rest of the year as just nothing but pantomime. There must be something that you're looking forward to other than that.
Well, I'm seeing Peter Bruce do Blow Dry Colossus at Pop Rex venue in Sunderland this Friday night. And it'll be the first time I can look. And it's a great album. It's a really interesting album. And the venue's great as well. It used to be a record shop and then it got some money. And it's now got a 250 capacity venue and it's got a nice cafe and bar. And it's in Sunderland. Who would have thought it?
Will he? I mean, does he play with a different band from Field Music, or does he play solo? How does it work?
Well, everything with Field Music always involves both brothers to greater or less degree. So Peter Bruce has got David Bruce involved, who co-wrote a couple of tracks, and I think there's other members of the band might turn up as well. So I'm sure it'll be good.
This is Pop Rex in Sunderland. I didn't even know Sunderland had. I've never heard of that place.
Well, yeah, I think it was run by two members of Frankie and the Heartstrings, an indie pop band who got big about 10 years ago or less, who were a good band. For whatever reason, he got involved with the record shop and they managed to get grants to expand it into a proper, modern venue.
All right. Just a little bit of news to finish with, Graham. Shed 7 have announced today, we're recording this on Monday, that they will be playing 2 concerts outdoors at Museum Gardens, July 19 and 20. And who do you think their special guest is?
Is it you and me?
Well, I think we'd like to think we're probably going to be there for one of the nights. It's going to be Peter Doherty, of course, who sings on Throwaways, the last track on the new Shed 7 album out in January.
If he turns up and isn't in jail in New York the days of the gigs, that'll be fantastic. That's a great double act.
It's a good. I think it's a really good signing to have Pete Doherty on there. I'm really glad he said yes to it. So that's going to be big stuff next year's 30th anniversary, and we're looking forward to probably interviewing Rick again as and when that comes about. So good night, Graham. I do feel this is perhaps our most dinosaur edition that we've ever done of this podcast.
Yeah, I'm not embarrassed though. We've been very honest, and what else can you be?
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.